Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions 7 days a week. Jason's our reader today. What do we got up first?
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida asks, any advice on a MixPre 3.2 to M2 MacBook Pro and Zoom? Each time I put my MacBook to sleep, the audio feed from the MixPre 3.2 stops, power cycle fixes it, latest firmware installed, USB powered, macOS Sequoia, ideas, thanks.
Ronnie?
Yeah, I would just start this answer by saying there is nothing wrong about this. This is intentional. But the problem or the small error that we can see on several external devices is that when a M series machine from Apple is powering up or started again, it seems to be a little bit clumsy in the way it resets and restarts all the external devices. So there is actually a few solutions for this. I run a utility that I'm not sure if that is working. It's called Caffeine. So it actually prevents it from falling asleep, even if I close it down and set it to sleep. So I'm kind of sabotaging Apple's intention to power saving. I don't know if that is something that you would like to do, but in that case, there are some apps or utilities that can prevent it from ever falling asleep. And you can't you can't do it manually as well. So that is one solution. I wouldn't kind of think of it as a good solution if you are if you really would like to turn off the power and actually make it go to sleep. So another thing is that when you are waking up these devices, what I tend to do, either in the software, I try to just change the source and go back to it. Sometimes that is actually waking up this device. I've never had this problem with MixPre. My MixPre is not directly connected to the machine via USB. I use it as an external device from my normal sound mixer. But I would think that it's not an easy way to prevent this from happening if you were going with the standard settings in Apple.
Jeff?
But there's a couple things here. The first thing that comes to mind is that joke when you go to the doctor, you go, "Doc, it hurts when I go like this." So the doctor says, "Well, don't go like that." You can first not let it go to sleep. If you need it to come back and be ready with that. There's a couple things that you weren't entirely clear on. So you say power cycling fixes, but you didn't say whether or not if switching audio devices back and forth, in other words, switch your devices to the internal devices, can you switch back to the MixPre and have it work? I mean, it would seem to imply that doesn't, so that's kind of odd. And also, where in your USB chain is this plugged in? You say it's USB powered, so first thing that comes to mind is it sufficiently powered, and where in that USB chain? So I would try making sure, or try one test where it's plugged directly into the MacBook if it's not, and the other is if it's plugged into some kind of hub, is it sufficiently powered, and is it a good quality hub? Those things. And then lastly, if changing devices and changing back at least gets you back to that, you can script that, you can automate it. So if you really need to let your machine go to sleep, and the reason, by the way, I say don't let it sleep, I mean, if you're letting it sleep because you're carrying it somewhere, then presumably you're unplugging. So just open the MacBook up and then plug it in, and that would seem to work. But if you're just having it in place and letting it sleep, you cannot do that. Or you can script setting that device. And there's one of the utilities from Loopback. I forget, I just remembered, I forget the name, which one of it is, but it is also scriptable, and you can automate changing devices. So you can have it, when you come back as part of some routine, getting ready to use Zoom, make sure that script and automate, making sure that device is your current audio device.
Mickey?
Yeah, hi. Welcome to modern versions of macOS. This has been something that has been happening since, I believe, Sonoma, or possibly earlier, but for sure Sonoma. I know people that experienced it since then. Yeah, the solution that I recommend to people is, if you can say, you mentioned this is a MacBook Pro. you can set it so that you can set your MacBook Pro so that if the MacBook Pro is is connected to a power adapter, an AC adapter, or charger, have it not go to sleep. That's one solution. Another one is to just do what you're doing now, which is to power cycle or unplug and replug in your audio interface. But this is macOS. Thank you, Apple.
One other little trick that I've had when I have my MixPre is not outputting audio to my Mac, or there's something funny with the chain. If it's in a place that it's difficult to unplug the MixPre from the Mac and plug it back in, I've found that when I hit record and put it into recording mode, the MixPre 3 will disconnect as an audio device from the Mac, and then when I hit stop, it reintroduces it as a new device again. So in lieu of power cycling, that seems to reset the handshake. But agreed, it is very frustrating because it is not consistent. And sometimes even the solution is not consistent. So come on, Apple. Core Audio. You can do it. Next question.
Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri asks, if all 6 surrounding surfaces are treated with moving blankets, thick blackout curtains, or carpet, should I be overly concerned with parallel surfaces like wall-to-wall or ceiling-to-floor?
Vic, I feel like you're in my room. I'd like to know how. Bill, go ahead.
So overly concerned, probably not. Concerned always, but I think the one thing you should be concerned about is to go ahead and use your chain, record something, play it back in a monitoring system you like, and listen to what it sounds like. All this theory is very important, and you should understand it. But the bottom line is, how does your system work in your world? And I say that because literally you can over-treat rooms. You can get them to the kind of point of being an anechoic chamber. And if you do that, it doesn't sound natural. In fact, for the ACX work I do for the audiobooks, a 0 dB noise floor gets you knocked out as non-compliant. They don't want nothing behind your audio content. They want a pleasant-sounding, realistic room. So I sometimes back off a little excessive treatment if I'm trying to build something out for a good, natural sound.
Ronnie?
I would say yes, and it depends. If this is for listening, is this for recording? Is this for critical listening to some recordings you're doing? Anyway, I would think of all these moving blankets or sound blankets. It's kind of helping a little bit. But standing waves in the deep frequencies where you have a lot of energy, there is only one way to get rid of them, and that is treating your room. And I would say that every time I come into a new room, I'm starting to think, how can I improve this audio? And adding sound blankets would, of course, take some of the early reflections or some of the mid to higher frequency fluttering around the room, but and of course early reflections from top desk to bottom, but you have to add a blanket to that as well, or displays. I have a big display here, which creates a lot of, and I can't, of course, hang a moving blanket over that because I would lose contact with every one of the persons in the panel. So there's a lot of things going on, and depending on what you're going to use this for, of course, moving blankets is a good idea to start with, or maybe the second thing, I would start with bass traps and getting all these wall-to-wall that are parallel, change them, put in some furniture, get a weird angle on stuff around, maybe even have kind of reflective surfaces angled so that you break up the direct reflection going between those parallel surfaces. So that is what I would start with, and there is a few good resources on the net, especially YouTube, which I referred to previously. I will put a link in the chat.
Marty?
All right, so none of these attempts at sound absorption work 100% at all frequencies. Depending on the actual surface of the material, like for instance, a sound blanket has a smooth surface, which means that it's going to reflect higher frequencies. Something like blackout curtains, like stage curtains, furry velvet floor, plush floor carpeting with uneven, soft, movable surfaces will absorb more high-frequency energy. And depending on the thickness and the density, will determine their ability to absorb mid and low frequencies. But So, even not having those blankets or curtains parallel, having them not parallel will improve things. However, the dimensions of the room are going to be the first and most important thing that affects the acoustics of the room. If you have a cube where all the dimensions are the same, you're going to have one specific frequency that is going to be resonant across all parallel surfaces, and then you'll have the overtones and the undertones, the multiples, the harmonics effect of that. So the dimensions of the room will be important, and how you treat them. There are also other means of sound treatment. In addition to absorption, there's reflections, as Ronnie mentioned, and then there's diffusion. Diffusion helps with what Bill said in trying to avoid totally absorbent anechoic chamber with no ambience whatsoever. Diffusion will take a sound, and then as it reflects off of this panel, breaks it up and distributes it, disperses it in many different directions, in many different frequencies, so that you no longer hear a distinct reflection, but the sound energy is still in the room and it's more spread out and ambient. So look at different ways of treating your room, look at the dimensions, and yes, I would pay attention to parallel surfaces.
And Mickey.
Yeah, very well explained there by Marty. Every single thing that you can do in terms of treating a room would help. And if you can hang your moving blankets and your curtains at angles that are not parallel with each other, then that would minimize the standing waves that you would get. Like in the room I'm in, none of the walls in any of the rooms in my studios are parallel, and all the panels that are on the walls, every single corner of those panels are at different heights. So there's not a single surface in this room that's parallel with each other. That includes my ceiling as well. That's all in varied random angles, so that this room is pretty darn dead. And for what I'm doing in this room, that's precisely what I need. If you're recording music, you may want a live room, or perhaps a part of the room that's more live than the other, so that you can put instruments in that side of the room. Like, say, for example, acoustic guitars or pianos. You may want to record those in a liver environment. Whereas if you're recording a drum kit that's meant for more contemporary music, hip hop, more upbeat kind of stuff, you may want a tighter sound there, and you want to record those at a more dead area of the recording environment. With regards to moving blankets and the curtains, though, there is quite a distinct a distinction between how up to what frequencies you can control with such light material. To be able to control sound waves, you really want mass that can stop those vibrations from transferring through and just reflecting back. Moving blankets and curtains, not much mass there, compared to a panel that's 30 kilos each or 40 kilos each. There's not nearly as much mass there to stop those waves. You won't be stopping much under 500 hertz. So, as Bill mentioned earlier, depending on what you're trying to capture in that environment, have a listen. And of course, don't listen on open speakers in that same environment that you're trying to make a judgment of. If you don't have any other space, get some accurate studio monitor headphones, so you can really seal yourself off from that environment that may be too lively or too dead, and you can make a more accurate judgment compared to listening on speakers on that same space.
Your questions and votes drive the show, so don't forget you can get into Makana, where, again, you can not only ask the questions, vote on the questions, but also chat with the other producers about the questions. It's really the inside track. If you're not in Makana, just go to officehours.global/join. That's officehours.global/join. Sign up for the email there, and you will get an email every day with who's on the panel and all the links on how to get on the inside track of all the good stuff Next question.
Coming in from the QR code, Darren in Minneapolis, Minnesota asks, what is the best lavalier mic element for web broadcast from an auditorium with a live audience and sound system?
Go ahead, Ronnie.
It depends. What we are using, if the volume in the PA system is kind of low, or if they are close to the stage where this is happening, we have one solution for that, and that's the Sennheiser HSP4, which has a really, really high signal before feedback. So that's our savior. We have a few venues in our area which the speakers or the PA systems is actually a little bit behind the natural position for the speaker, and that causes all types of problems, or not all kinds. One specific problem is feedback, and the only head-worn microphone we can use to fix that is the HSP4 from Sennheiser. There are other solutions as well, and the thing with this microphone, it's supercardioid. It's pointed directly to the mouth, and it's our problem solver for these types of situations.
Bill?
Yeah, I'm going to say it's situational as well. I once did a tour when I went around and I did a live teaching seminar in a bunch of systems, and I was carrying my own stuff. But in one of them, they gave me the house system. It was the best sounding thing I had ever heard. And I thought, well, I'll just go buy that. I think it was a Countryman headset mic. I'll go buy one of those and I'll sound like that. And the next time I went to a different room and put that headset on, it didn't work the same way. There are just so many variables with this. I will say also that sometimes the best in terms of open and transparency is not your friend. I used to carry in my camera kit, and when I was back using Sony ECM series lavaliers, I used to carry ECM 77s and ECM 44s. The 44s are not anywhere near as live or transparent as the 77s, but a lot of time in the room that I was in, that less sensitive reach was exactly what I needed to keep it from feeding back and causing problems. I'm not necessarily saying these are the tools. I'm saying that two different microphone types or two different microphone designs in two different spaces react differently. So you just really, I think, have to try some things based on good first principles and see what works in that room for that sound.
Marty?
Yeah, I have to agree with both Bill and with Ronnie. It really depends on a lot of variables, mostly the relationship of the sound system, the loudspeakers, and how much sound from them are getting onto the stage. If you're in a room that has a well-designed sound system, the stage should have very little sound on it. And that increases the potential gain before feedback. But if you're in a room where the sound system is not installed properly, maybe there are reflections off of the sidewall. I was in a theater recently where there was 2 point source boxes per side mounted in front of the stage, but within inches of the top of the horn, there was a cloud hung from the ceiling, and so about 6 inches of the front face of the cloud was reflecting sound directly from the horn back onto the stage. I mean, it was very apparent. When I'm standing on stage, I could hear that speaker clearly on stage, and of course, that is going to reduce your gain before feedback. Speakers that are in front of the stage are going to be better than speakers that are behind the stage. And, that is often seen when there's no proscenium wall, right? Where there's a stage that's completely in front of a wall behind it, and there's no place to hang speakers on a wall other than behind the stage. And the venue doesn't want to hang them from the ceiling in front of the stage. That is often a problem. Many times those are column arrays, which really focus the sound very narrowly in the vertical plane. And that narrow vertical plane, which is supposed to be aimed at the audience, just happens to pass right by where microphones would be. And so, again, reduced gain before feedback. So what are the tools that we can use to deal with this if we're not going to move the loudspeakers and we can't really change the acoustics of the room very easily? So Cardioid microphones, supercardioid microphones are, pretty much a good bet. Certainly going to be better than an omnidirectional microphone, which is going to pick up everything in the room. Head-worn microphones are better because the sound source is closer to the microphone, which means you need less gain in the preamp to get the intended volume. And with less gain, you're picking up less ambient sound and less from the loudspeakers. So proximity is your friend. The closer you can get the microphone to the sound source, the better. So which means that if you're mounting a lavalier microphone, for example, you want it up here and not down below. Closer you can get, the better. Also making sure that the capsule is actually pointed at the person's mouth. Sometimes, depending on what they're wearing, that means actually angling the microphone so that it's not pointed out here, but it's pointed over here. So, and if they're wearing a t-shirt, you want to be sure to turn it 90 degrees so that it's up there. Also, you don't want it too close to the chin because you get a lot of shadowing and you'll lose high frequencies, which means you're going to turn it up or turn up the EQ and, again, less gain before feedback.
Mickey?
Yeah, a bunch of the I guess you can say go-to default microphones for these types of situations include the Shure WL185. This is the new M version, which is a slightly lower profile, as well as the DPA 4080, which I'm certain many of us have seen on stage, like keynote presentations. Both of these have are available with a slew of microphone mounting accessories, both first party and from third party, and also you can get dual microphone mounts, of course for primary and backup, where you have dual transmitters on your presenter's belt. But yeah, these are the very common models you would see on stage.
We've got evening shows. If you're not getting enough of us in the morning, you can hang out with us at night. We've got extra hours. That's on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific. And then the rundown is on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Pacific. Just check us out on YouTube to see those in the evening. Next question.
Tommy Chance in St. Paul, Minnesota asks, the level of my YouTube streams are always lower than most others. Where should I be setting my level in OBS? I've always been on the safe side, trying to keep it out of the red so it doesn't clip.
Go ahead, Marty. Sorry, go ahead, Marty.
See, he's not clipping
Marty's
at all.
ears out.
Go ahead. Mickey, why don't you go ahead?
So yeah, Tommy, with for most delivery over the internet, like platforms such as YouTube and the like, with the metering that OBS uses by default, which is peak metering, you will most likely live in the red the entire time. YouTube, for example, YouTube expects loudness of minus 14 LUFS, and you would typically set your peaks at -1 or -0.5 dBFS. With that type of loudness, you would be living in the red on the OBS meters. In terms of getting your levels straight, though, I know, Tommy, you typically mix on a external hardware mixing console. What you want to do is calibrate the output of your console to the input of OBS and vice versa, so that -20 dBFS or -18 dBFS on your console reads exactly the same within OBS's meters. That way, you don't even have to look at OBS's meters, because what you're sending out of your board is exactly what OBS sees. And you do your control of the dynamic range within your mixing console, whether you, I prefer to do compression dynamic range control in multiple light stages instead of like a really big chomp on the compressor at the very end, or slamming a limiter at the very end. I like to do compression at multiple light stages, like at the channel level, at the group level, at the bus level, at the matrix level, and slowly bring down that dynamic range and make it louder and louder and louder until I hit my loudness spec that I'm trying to achieve. YouTube again is expecting negative 14 LUFS. I personally do not mix that loud unless I am specifically told to do so. A program like Office Hours, for example, I've set things so that um, I try to hit a target of an average, long-term average of negative 18 LUFS. If it were music content, I might go a little hotter. If it were more like content that is more of like more soft-spoken dialogue, I'd maybe go a little lower than that. But I never tried to aim for negative 14 LUFS. That's just too squashed for my liking. And so unless I get a specific spec sheet that tells me to do so, I wouldn't do that. But again, control your dynamics at your mixing console. Calibrate your mixing console and OBS so that they what's hitting OBS is exactly what you're seeing at the console. And don't worry about hitting the red at OBS. Because you will most likely live there for most of broadcasts going to the web.
Bill?
So for almost 2,000 shows, we have been doing the same thing to start our show every day, and that is audio checks. And I got to tell you, I have been so happy that we have done that, which is really a process of kind of looking through the whole chain and making sure that everybody's levels are set correctly. And it was double reinforced to me yesterday when I did, or last night actually, I did a big audio drama thing with a whole bunch of other people from coming in all over the country, and they were using Zencastr, which is a program I wasn't familiar with. But the feedbacks and the mix minuses were very difficult for me to grab onto and listen. And it really messed with my performance in a lot of circumstances because I couldn't hear both what myself was saying, what the other people were saying often. And so you're trying to add nuance and perform correctly, but you cannot get the levels right. And it was really frustrating. So all I guess I'm saying is that, Tommy, and for everybody else listening, if you're doing any kind of broadcast, do pay attention to your entire chain. If you need to rehearse, rehearse. If you need to set levels with tones, set levels with tones. It is really important. I shouldn't have had to go through as much stress yesterday for my performances as I did just because I wasn't able to get the right levels set, and particularly the monitor levels in my head before I started the work. And that's not right.
Ronnie?
Yeah, so what could I say about this? I think just a second. I think the biggest problem we have in the industry is all these softwares. So this is not going to be a solution. This is going to be a small of a rant, I think. I'm just watching my words carefully.
Do it. Go, Ronnie. Yes, go.
All these software vendors are producing something they think is really cool. They have some blinking lights going from left to right, and it's changing color as they move. They tell squat. They are so bad to be a tool for adjusting levels. They should rather have them removed. So I've always tend to I'm trying to improve these tools in all these systems. So at any chance I have, I tell them to let us have a good metering system in all these tools. If OBS does it, if Mino Live does it, there are other platforms as well. All these software-based platforms are tricking you as the user to be lowering your signal too much. It's not even up there where it should be, and this is really annoying. So my message to all you vendors that are doing these systems, they are really good, but they are lacking very much in the audio leveling part.
Mickey?
Yeah, certainly like a lot of these software tools, or not even software tools that are made for video aren't great when it comes to audio. That's not what they're designed to do. It's not what they're great at. But I think one thing that's important as well as someone who's mixing a show, putting a show out there, is to understand the different types of meterings and the different types of ballistics of metering. OBS has a peak meter in it. What a peak meter is good at is telling you how far or how close you are to peaking. It doesn't tell you much about the average loudness, which is how people perceive things, or people perceive how loud or how quiet something is. It's just how close you are to digital clipping. Or I guess with older equipment, how close you are to analog saturation. It's very important to know the different kinds of meters and how they react to sound, and the ballistics, how quickly or how slowly they react to it. When it comes to really like knowing how people perceive it, what you want is a loudness meter. A peak meter won't do you any good there because, for example, you may be hitting a snare drum and you have your gain quite low, but that peak may still hit 0 dBFS because a snare drum is quite dynamic. It may be perceived as like a really quiet snare drum, but your peaks will still be up there. So the dynamics and also where your peaks will land will vary from source to source, and that's why it's good for someone mixing something for broadcast to know how loud what the actual loudness is in LKFS or LUFS. That's how people perceive the loudness of a program, not with the peak meter.
And the other thing that you mentioned, Mickey, earlier was as you're getting closer and closer to competing for loudness, it reminds me a lot of the early 2000s, the way that albums were mixed. Like if you look at Green Day's American Idiot, the dynamic range from 2004 to 2012 was doubled in terms of the distance between the quiet parts and the loud parts of the song. And then when they re-released it in Atmos and had to conform to, I think, -18 for Atmos, now it's, 3 times what the original was. And it's a much richer sonic experience when you have that dynamic range. You are going to sacrifice a little bit of loudness, but you're just not crushing and compressing all of your sound into that. How can I make it, blah, like the radio commercial that's in your face? Of course, you have to have something worth listening to, but I'm in the camp of dynamic range over just pure loudness. Bill?
Well, having been around in the AM radio days, I will tell you, back in those ancient times, people listened almost always in their car and they pushed buttons. So one of the reasons everybody just compressed the bejesus out of everything was they wanted, when you hit the button for KRUX versus KRIZ, where I grew up, but whatever the two radio stations are, they wanted that in your face. My station sounds louder than your station, so you'll stay on it because that makes you feel good. And it's a horrible thing we did to people's training.
Marty?
And this is a really, really good discussion. There are so many facets to it. First thing is about metering. Metering is a measuring tool, and there are many different kinds of measuring tools. And a good LUFS meter is a very comprehensive thing because it shows you several different measures of what your sound quality is, what your sound level is, and all of the different ballistics, whether it's short-term peak or average or long-term, really does help to sort of inform you about your overall level and dynamics. Second thing is dynamics. And you want to tailor your dynamic range to who your expected audience is and what devices they're listening to. So if you can expect that people are listening on a high-fidelity stereo system that can reproduce a fairly wide dynamic range, then you want to produce your material with suitable dynamic range. If they're listening on their phones, that has a very narrow dynamic range, then you want to keep your dynamic range very limited, because with a wider dynamic range material, people will adjust their volume for the loudest parts, and then when the low parts come in, they won't be able to hear it. So they'll be constantly changing their volume control. So your audience is somewhat dependent. For OBS, for webcasting, for talk shows, for podcasts, you want to keep a fairly narrow dynamic range, I think. We have a very quiet stage here in this show. And we're using microphones, and we're using very, very little processing, right, in our signal chain. Yet our dynamic range is not very wide. You can hear this, you can hear us clearly on pretty much any device that you're listening to. But if you're doing music, or if you're doing a stage play where you've got people shouting and then you've got people whispering, you don't want to keep a very wide dynamic range if your audience is not listening on devices that can reproduce that. So so dynamic range is often related to and thought of as equated to volume, right?
Mickey.
Yeah. Certainly, more compressed. Sorry, let me start over. Smaller speakers benefit more from more compressed signals because they're not well capable of representing a signal of large dynamic range. So I agree with what Marty mentioned about if you have a hint of what type of exhibition device or what type of device people are watching the program on, then that may guide you in terms of the sort of how much loudness units or how much dynamic range you would like to push out on the final program mix. One key thing though is to have a standard and stick to that standard. With regards to what Marty mentioned earlier, of people having to turn levels up and down, like their speakers up and down. If you stick to one standard, whether that be a minus 14 LUFS as YouTube wants, or minus 23 or minus 24 LUFS as broadcast typically wants, or something even quieter, what's most important is you have a standard that you stick to, that you mix for. That way, people would not have to turn their speakers up and down. That's a job of the A1. Ride those faders up and down. If someone's speaking quieter, push that fader up. Someone's speaking louder, push it down a little. That's just part of putting a show out. Someone needs to be mixing.
You can ask questions 24/7 at askofficehours.global. There's nothing to sign into, nothing to log up for. Wait, sign up for, log into. You get it. Askofficehours.global is open 24/7 for your questions, and it's really easy. All you got to do is give us your name, give us your question, and we'll start to work it in over the next few shows. So if you're not yet in Makana, check out askofficehours.global. Next question.
Our own Jeff Cohen on the panel from Miami Beach, Florida asks, Bill, can you talk about the issues you've experienced changing your mic mute button?
Jeff, can you give us a little more of the question?
I'll just start it off. Yeah, I'll just start it off to say we were talking about this a little bit ahead of time, and I think it's interesting enough to maybe have a discussion. So, and just, I know you were using your more physical button first, and I forget exactly, but you talked about a different one. So I'd be curious to hear about.
Yeah, I'll tell you
what the
progression
goal was, and then what the real world results were.
Sure. Because we are so concerned with sound here, I got feedback a lot of the time about the fact that my mic muting system was audible, even in small measures, and nobody wants that for the show. We want it to be as close to perfect as possible. And I'll tell you, the battle for me has always been this. Here's my Rolls MS-111 mic mute that I've used for probably 900 plus of these shows. And the thing that I love about it, you can probably see there's a little white button, and it's a mechanical button, so I'll get it close to my microphone. You can hear that. And I've got a live, very sensitive microphone here, and Mickey is going nuts here because he hates that sound. And Mickey's job is to get the sound as close to perfect as possible. The thing that I miss, though, because we worked out, and he helped me with a Stream Deck to work with Companion in the Chain in order to make a perfectly silent mute. But these buttons give me no tactile feedback. And mic mute here, when I push my finger to it, and by the way, this sits under the lip of my computer, so I don't see it, but tactily, if I'm going to mute, I push my finger to the button, and I know instantly, is it down, and my finger goes over it, or does my finger run into it, which means that it's up? So I have a physical feedback loop for me. Now, every mute system that I've investigated fails in one of those two areas. Either it is not silent because it is using some sort of mechanical pressure, audible click type button, or it doesn't have that, but it doesn't give me that tactile feedback. So it's been frustrating. I've looked at a bunch of them, but I can never really tell all the ones that seem to be perfectly silent because there is a transient, right? The switch is going from on to off when it connects. And often that can be heard, particularly if there's background sound. You can hear suddenly the audio snap on. And I think the better mutes kind of manage to make that a little slope so it doesn't sound so overt. So, I'm still a little frustrated by muting in general. I like Mickey's system a lot. I love the fact that it's silent, but I have to look down at it under the lip every time to make sure whether I'm muted on or muted off.
Jeff?
End of stuff.
And I'll just give a little tip for, it's really only good for the most part if you're almost exclusive to using Zoom for your whether it's streaming, meetings, whatever. Zoom happens to be very good at assigning global shortcut keys. And if you have a full-size keyboard, especially for a Mac, F19 gets used by nothing, but it's in the upper right corner, so I don't have to look at anything. I can always find it. In fact, my finger tends to be, when I'm live, on that button. And it's global, so meaning Zoom does not have to be in focus, and it still works, and it works flawlessly. I've never had an issue with it. The problem is, if you're like a lot of people, you're not only using Zoom, and that's when it gets tricky. Some software lets you assign things, and some are others don't, and that's where my fallback is the Stream Deck, which I've had working fairly successfully. It's a totally different chain, but then that's my fallback. Everything. I mean, then it doesn't matter what software because you're just muting the audio chain.
Go ahead, Jason.
For the past nearly 2,000 episodes, I've used F19, and it has never failed me.
Mickey.
Yeah, along the same lines, the default keyboard shortcut for Zoom works well for me on macOS. It's Command-Shift-A. Haven't had issues, and yeah, just muscle memory. One thing with what we built with Bill's system, though, with the Stream Deck, it actually controls the console application for his Universal Audio Apollo interface. So when Bill mutes, it also mutes the side tone that goes to his ear. So that's possibly a helpful indication whether for Bill to know whether he's muted or not. If he hears his microphone bleeding into his ears, then he's unmuted.
Yeah, that's a very good point. More feedback. I think as a performer, the more feedback you have in terms of the state you are in, the better you feel about doing the show, because I know I'm muted if I can't hear myself in my own microphone. So that's a great point.
Yeah, Mickey helped me with a similar situation because I was also dealing with switches that had an audible click to it. And what I ended up going with for a while, and I still have this in my chain, although I don't use it that much anymore, is this switch from what is it? It's Proco Sound. It's this power mute. It's this little active muting switch. Now, it still has a physical control, and it's a powered system, so there's no click as the phantom's going on and off of this microphone. But I ended up putting it on the floor because I needed it to be away from the microphone so that I could click it. But now the problem is it has this great light, but it's out of sight. So what I ended up doing is that I took an old Brio and I put it into an HDMI
Video
to
assist.
UVC OBS, and I had a mute light in my multi-view. So I had it on one of the corners, and I knew if I was muted or not because it was red or green, and it was a little extra, but I liked it. The other thing that I've done is because I still had a problem with that system because it was muting my microphone with a hardware mute, but the signal chain was happening before noise assist in my MixPre. And so Mickey had figured out for me that if I were to use a MIDI controller like the Nano Control Studio that's here, if I mute myself literally by moving this fader up and down, and I have this nice little gaff tape stopper because I'm, it's my Appalachian engineering. That is going to make sure that my noise assist print still stays on. So if it's a hot day and the air conditioner's on, you don't hear that go away. And the other nice thing about that is it's quite quiet. I do feel the need, because I'm so nervous that I'm going to take a big gulp of coffee as soon as I think I'm muted. I still watch the little MixPre screen when I do that, because I want to make sure that all the little numbers go down to 0 before I really know that I'm muted. And like Bill's setup, it also does mute the side tone in my ear when the level is down. So that's worked fairly well. Jeff?
And I'll add to that, two different versions of this. If I'm just using Zoom and it's mute, I have, scripted. Every single window always makes sure that Zoom is on the left edge of the screen, and no window ever covers up the little audio microphone in the bottom left. So I can always glance over there, and now it's by habit. I can always glance over there and see visually if I'm muted or not. And now the flip side, when I use my Stream Deck button, that actually I got carried away, but it does some quick scripting and actually changes the wallpaper behind everything. And if you have the translucent menu bar, I have different colors on the menu bar by virtue of the wallpaper that tell me whether I'm muted or not. So you can get a little carried away with the scripting there.
Office hours, community members get carried away for a simple solution? No.
It's the only show on the air
I'm
we can
shocked.
do 12 minutes on mute switches.
Next question.
Then I just got a MIDI, interface in the back and changed the light. I'm sorry. Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, Davinci Resolve has a great speaker detection in its transcripts. Is there a way to export a text file that includes a full transcript complete with speaker ID?
Jeff?
And I'll start by taking issue with that it's got great speaker detection. It is, I will grant you, it is good if you have one audio track. If you have your speakers on separate audio tracks, I've really had very, very mixed results, because then you need to be looking at the timeline. And let me just show a little bit of this. I was trying to pull up a demo in Davinci, but this is just easier if I show this. So you guys seeing this? Yeah. So here's a little video. So this brings up the transcription window. In this example, this is based on one audio track, but these little buttons in the little icons in the upper left corner switch between showing you the transcription of the file or the timeline. And again, they're going to be one and the same when it's one audio track. If what you want is you want to be looking at the transcription and you want to transcribe the timeline. So you can transcribe the individual clips, but you need a transcription. If you have separate audio files, you need to separately run a transcription on the timeline. That will generate the aggregate text. And there's a couple of ways you can do it. You're basically going to get subtitles. Now, you can literally just come in here and do a select all and literally copy and paste it into a text file, or you can just simply come up here to the three little dots in the upper right corner, choose export subtitles. You can select whether or not it shows the speaker, but you don't have you have a little bit of the formatting choices, but I don't even really spend time on that, because what I wanted to encourage everyone to look at, and I can't speak highly enough, I've mentioned them a bunch of times, is editingtools.io. So I used to export transcriptions in all these different files. I used to export, everything I could. Any option that gave me, I'd export every single version. And I just settled on standard subtitles because it's a standard. So once I know that I have a subtitles file, I can use this or any number of tools to rejigger it into any other kind of thing I want. So if you come up to converters and subtitle tool and converter, and when you look here, you have a choice of quite a number of different versions. They support pretty much any source in standard, SRT, extended. And the important thing is what you want to convert it to. And if you come down to the text options, there's PDF, there's simple. And if you look on the right, you have all these options in terms of how you want to customize it to your heart's content. And you can pretty much generate any version of that you want. Oh, by the way, I should also add, you can just dump a transcript into Gemini, ChatGPT, and ask it. It understands the standard subtitle file, so you can actually ask it to do what you want. I've built and separately trained a gem in Gemini to do just that, and I use it only for that purpose, that every time it does something I don't want, I guide it and tell it to remember what I do want. And now it's pretty flawless. I could just dump a file in there without giving it any instructions, and it knows what to do. So that's another thing I would play with if this is an ongoing standard need.
Now, the other thing that I would recommend you do, and it's been a minute since I've done this, but on New Year's Day, 2024, worked with the LLMs that were available at that time to build an app that would take, this is unrelated to your question, but this is just an example of what someone with no coding experience was able to pull off. I had an app that would utilize the scene detection that's built into Resolve and grab the middle frame of each cut in a movie file and then export that to a still frame and then assemble those still frames so that you had a single frame that was representative of every single cut that was in a film or a video. And then it would turn it into a poster that you could print. That was done with ChatGPT, Claude, and some Lua scripting that is built into Resolve. So what you may want to do is have a conversation with your vibe coding platform of choice. It's probably a ChatGPT 4.5 or a Claude, and give them the idea and say, hey, is there any way to do that with scripting, like whether it's a Python script or a Lua script, and then work with that in Resolve. You can do some pretty cool things with the tools that are built in there. I was shocked that I was able to do that without installing any dependencies, and having never written anything, to have gone from having not written any reasonable code outside of Excel for my entire life to getting an app that was doing something as complex with that in a couple of hours was pretty breathtaking. If you're enjoying Office Hours, there are a couple ways that you can help. Of course, you can like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We appreciate that. There's also volunteer opportunities, both during the show and around the show. You can go to officehours.global/volunteer to look for those opportunities. And finally, if you'd like to help support the show financially, you can do that at officehours.global/donate. We are a nonprofit, and all your donations help us keep the show running every single day. And we'd like to be doing this for a really long time. So if you're interested in doing that, officehours.global/donate. We appreciate all the contributions. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida asks, audio cassettes are making a comeback. Why do people listen to obsolete audio tech?
Jason.
Sometimes the simple answer is the correct one. Nostalgia, or they weren't born when they were in use.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, that's really precisely it. And there was a funny, there was a documentary long ago on industrial design. And this industrial designer was kind of walking the host. They just went to a hardware store, for example, and he just stopped at the ladder section. And he said, okay, this is a great example. Look at all the ladders you have to choose from. There's aluminum, there's polyurethane. He said, and then there's like the old-fashioned wooden one. And he said, look at these. And in every measurable way, all of these ladders, every other option is better than the wooden one. They're going to last longer. They're more durable. They're not going to rot. They're lighter. And yet people still buy the wooden one. At least some people do. Why? That's just what they're used to. They like it. There's no real tangible reason in any way why that's better. So the same thing, nostalgia. And then for the folks, I mean, there are cases, there's iPhone cases to make it look like you're carrying a Walkman and cassette thing. It's crazy. And it's just exactly what Jason said.
Mickey.
Yeah, I agree with what Jason mentioned. It's nostalgia. Digital audio is merely a simplified, a very, very simplified facsimile of the actual original source sound. People used math to try to determine what we can sufficiently remove from a signal to simplify its capture and storage, and still allow people to get a sense and hear what they expect to hear with a sound with an audio signal. This is especially true with compressed signals. MP3, AAC, what you get off of iTunes and Spotify and all that. But even with CD quality audio, you have a finite number of samples of the real signal. You only get 44,100 with audio CD, 44,100 samples per second there. What you're missing out on is not necessarily what you hear, but what you feel. You get a certain kind of feeling when you're listening to tape, to vinyl, to analog means of storage that you don't feel when you're listening to a digital signal. And I think that's what people are nostalgic for, not necessarily, like you can tell with Spotify, you're listening to a song from Frank Sinatra, but you don't feel the same thing from that you get from what you get with vinyl or tape or analog storage.
Bill?
Mickey nailed it. It's not what you think, it's what you feel. And if you came of age and were dating and falling in love and you listened to cassettes at the time, as soon as you put on a cassette with that song on it, those feelings will come flooding back and change your mental state. So it's all about how it makes you feel.
There is also in the super polished AI, semi-AI generated world that we're living in anymore, there is a tendency to over-polish things. And my brother was listening to a song that was done by an AI, and it was really well done. The production sounded good, the instrumentation, the mixing of the thing that even though it didn't really mix anything, but what it produced was pleasurable to sound to. At the end of it, it was like, it just felt really cold. I wish that they were a little flat somewhere. I wish that they were a little off they swung a beat or something like that. There's not that humanity in it. And when you try to, as Mickey was describing, put so much into the digital piece, you find that stuff starts to get a little bit colder. But there is an art as you move on to newer formats that can take advantage of instead of just trying to be a stand-in for what was happening on analog with the stereo mix. Now, when you get into Atmos mixes and you get into higher sample rate, higher bit rate, higher bit depth, like when you start to get into 9624 on a really nice sound system in an Atmos mix, you start to feel things in a different way. But now you have people who are really taking advantage of the technology, and I think we're also interested in what is Apple doing as they're continuing to push, the immersive spatial formats forward. Marty?
Right. So when cassettes were popular, the predominant recording medium in studios was analog tape. And analog tape had certain characteristics to it in terms of dynamic range, in terms of frequency response, and in terms of linear distortion. And that translated pretty well to vinyl records and to quarter-inch tape. But when it came to cassette tapes, since we're still dealing with an analog medium, it's not like we're taking bits and throwing it away as we do in compressed digital, but there are compromises that needed to be made, or that were unavoidable, rather, in terms of dynamic range, in terms of recording level, in terms of distortion in the medium. And all of those characteristics lent itself to the sound signature of cassette tape. And remember that cassette tape was invented in order to have a playable medium that you can use in an automobile, or that you can carry. Well, that was the original intent. And then after that, it became, well, I can carry around a small portable player on my hip, and that became the Walkman. So it became the first portable player medium that could be. But it's the characteristics of the tape that gave it its sound. It wasn't terribly great, but it was unique, and it people remember that and have that nostalgic yen for it. And then there are people who are alive today who weren't then, that really they're getting into the older music, and they're getting into analog records and vinyl records, and so they're simply looking for older technology to sample it as an experience and see what they get from it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here on a wonderful Wednesday morning. To the panel, thanks for coming in and sharing your life experience and helping enrich the lives of everyone listening. It's been a pleasure getting smarter this morning. Not any one of us is as smart as all of us, and isn't that cool? To the back-end crew, thank you for keeping the show running smoothly, keeping us organized. There are a ton of people who work 7 days a week, not only during the show, but also around the show to keep us organized. We appreciate you so much. And to our producers, thanks for asking such great questions. We went a little deeper on the tape thing than I thought, but I like it. So you never know quite where we're going to go, and we appreciate you bringing those every single day. Your questions drive the show, and we can't do it without you. Tlaloc traversal today, had we gone around in person to ask these questions, is 7,000 miles. That's 12,000 kilometers, 58 million bananas for scale. See you in after hours.
It just occurred to me that atmosphere is a low viscosity liquid. We were talking about distance and whatnot, and like how
low.
sound changes.
Yeah.
Exceptionally. But then again, in Illinois, you wake up and there's so much humidity. It's incredible.
So only
Every time I
slow-
see the Downey
slow
recommendation, I always think, yeah, but then I'm like, wait, shh, don't tell too many people.
All right, Mickey, I'll ping you. I got to get back on the other mute system.
All right.
You're right.
Bill, thank you for covering for me Friday.
Oh, no problem at all. Happy to do
Appreciate
it.
that, sir.
You're on the schedule.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Yes.
Bye-bye.